One of the things I tell my patients is that I've been a cardiologist now for about 15 years. And outside of a medical emergency, like someone gets shot and has to be put back together again, I've never seen anything come close to the breadth and depth of benefits that a plant-based diet provides.
That's cardiologist Dr. Robert Ostfeld on the podcast that's dedicated to making you healthier by interviewing medical doctors and scholars of lifestyle medicine and plant-based nutrition. This is episode number 44 of the Ian Kramer podcast. I'm really glad I was able to bring you this conversation with Dr. Ostfeld. I would say in the lifespan of this podcast, I worked the hardest and it took the longest to book this interview, but that's not a negative. It paid off and provided a really good conversation. Dr. Robert Ostfeld is a cardiologist who works at Montefiore Health System in the Bronx in New York City. After reading the China study and learning of the work of his colleague, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, he saw a need to create a similar cardiac wellness center in New York City, where there was arguably a larger population and a greater need for a system like this to exist. He created the Cardiac Wellness Program at Montefiore. And this is a little bit off of their website. It says they bring a unique nutrition-centered approach to the management of cardiovascular disease. The program aims to prevent and reverse heart disease with a whole food plant-based diet. Dr. Ostfeld and his dietitian and co-founder Lauren Graff work with patients to embrace a diet that includes no animal products and consists of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, legumes, a small amount of nuts and avocados, as well as dairy alternatives. In our conversation, because there's so much nutritional controversy about what we should and should not eat, we speak very bluntly about whether we really know the cause of heart disease, which is the number one cause of mortality in this country. Additionally, Dr. Ostfeld's position on blood cholesterol, cardiovascular disease myths, and regression of atherosclerotic plaques. He also addresses an existing list of top 10 foods to keep your arteries clean and tells us what does the science say about these specific foods or food groups. Friendly reminder, I post a lot of additional content on my Plant-Based Cyclist Facebook page, and we also have regular Facebook Live sessions every other Tuesday at 9 a.m. Eastern, which you are invited to attend. We speak about how to become healthier. I answer any questions you have about wellness, diet, lifestyle, cycling, anything like that, and always bring a few lessons with me to teach to the group. I hope you enjoy this conversation on episode number 44 with Dr. Robert Ostfeld. Dr. Robert Ostfeld, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to the podcast. I want to first start out with your rise in the public eye as a doctor in this plant-based movement. I feel like if someone were to ask me, name for me the top 5 doctors who are just growing exponentially, I would name Dr. Greger, Michael Greger, Garth Davis, Michelle McMacken, and maybe there's another one in there, and also Robert Ostfeld. So I'm curious, was that intentional, and how do you account for that growth in terms of social media and people just knowing you?
Well, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's a real honor to be here with you and with your audience. And it's been an incredible ride, and it was never my goal to look for attention or fame. And you're very generous about, describing me with those lists of people. I don't consider myself at that level by any means. My goal really has been to help patients and to spread the word about this healthy lifestyle. And it all started and has grown in just incredibly organically. I finished all my medical training and I had the opportunity to train with a lot of incredible people. And I learned a lot along the way. And we're talking like 11 years, like med school, residency, fellowship. But I learned next to nothing about nutrition. And that's unfortunately an incredibly common theme, although times are changing somewhat now, which is great. And when I finished up my training, I kind of knew that a Mediterranean style diet was good, but I couldn't really define it. And so then I came down to Montefiore to work and did all the stuff I was taught to do, medications, procedures, which can be very important. And then, encourage a Mediterranean style diet. And people got like a little bit better. And that's great. But I didn't go into medicine so people could get a little bit better. I wanted real transformational change. And so I was really getting disillusioned, honestly. And there was this one Sunday morning, I remember I was on call sitting in the hospital and I was rounding, seeing patients on the floor. And there was someone who'd come in with a big heart attack overnight, and they did a stenting procedure at around 3 a.m, a very appropriate procedure, and they saved the person's life. And I was thinking to myself, it just seems like the only people who are just dramatically saving lives in our cardiology division are the people who are, rushing in at the 11th hour to grab you from the jaws of death. And it's great that we can do that, but I'm like, there's got to be a better way. And it was right around that time that someone handed me a copy of the China study. And, being a myopic cardiologist, I went straight to that. There's a little section in the middle that's about heart disease. And I started looking through it. I'm like, oh my God, this like makes so much sense, and learned more and more about it. And was really fortunate to be able to connect with Dr. Esselstyn and Dr. Campbell and many others, Dr. Barnard in this space. And one thing led to another, and started our cardiac wellness program with the goal of preventing and reversing disease with a plant-based diet. And of course, I say disease, not just heart disease, because it's good for us for dozens and dozens of reasons, not just heart disease. And we started that probably 6 or so years ago. And we've had the chance to work with thousands of patients in the inpatient and outpatient setting, and it has grown and evolved. And it's really just that luck of the draw that day I got the China study, and it's just sort of been like that, just organically grown, and we've built in more organization and infrastructure into our program. And that's I guess how we've gotten here from a 500-foot view. So it's been a real pleasure.
Cool. Very good. I mean, I hope that someday I can come down to Montefiore and check out the facilities, and maybe we'll get a part 2 interview in. You mentioned before that you had been disillusioned. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Like what did you think, and how were you being disillusioned?
Well, I really wanted to have the opportunity to help people get a lot better. And as a cardiologist, we see people who are enriched for disease. And I kind of felt like, with the medications that we could give, which are really powerful and well tested and can be quite helpful, we can help people feel a little bit better. Certainly when someone's in the throes of an acute problem, like if they have heart failure and a lot of fluid backing up in their system, we can help them get rid of that fluid in the hospital, or maybe avoid a hospitalization. They can feel a lot better that way. But it seemed to me like, in terms of really improving quality of life, really changing the metrics of health, like a game changing kind of intervention, we were just treading water. And I have tons of respect for my cardiology colleagues and my cardiothoracic surgical colleagues, and they do a lot of incredible stuff. But, and what, as I imagine we might talk about during this interview, when I was a kid, I had a couple of brothers who died from an incurable disease. And that's why I ultimately went into medicine. And so I wasn't happy with at least my own personal sense that we were treading water, or making a teeny step forward here, a teeny step forward there. So it didn't seem to me consistent with the legacy of my brothers and why I went into medicine in the first place, to practice that kind of way. And so that kind of sensation or that feeling kind of started coming to a head right around the time when I was handed the China study. So it was just a perfect confluence of events.
I definitely want to. I read in doing a little research and a little digging, I definitely found a few passages and just a few mentions on your brothers and sort of your family. I definitely want to get into that. But I want to ask you one more follow up on this. What we've been talking about is I find that there are more and more doctors like you every day reading the China study, watching Forks Over Knives. Maybe some of their colleagues are prescribing plant based nutrition. But there's also way more doctors out there and medical professionals who are still skeptical, and maybe even larger than that is healthcare facilities like Montefiore. So my question is, have you met resistance at all from Montefiore, from your colleagues about what it is that you're doing?
I'm really fortunate to be able to work at Montefiore. It's a very large health system in the Bronx and beyond in New York City. And there's a very, very large indigent patient population that Montefiore cares for, and they take their social mission incredibly seriously. And so I feel very fortunate to be a part of that. And when I wanted to start this program, I approached my chief and I said, look, I'd really like to start this. And he said, go for it. So I didn't get any roadblocks there at all. I mean, I have to fund it on my own, but I mean, at least I didn't get any roadblocks in terms of starting it. But so I think it's been really well embraced by the system. And if I kind of think back over 6 or 7 years, we now the program is I think pretty well known in our system. It's robust and people are referring, surgeons are even referring to it. We've done research projects with surgeons, which you wouldn't necessarily expect from a stereotypical point of view about plant-based nutrition. And we've made some major changes within the hospital as well. I've had the chance to work with food services. They've been incredible, and nutrition. And we now have plant-based meals that you can order for inpatients. I believe it's now in 5 of the hospitals in the Montefiore system. So somewhere around 1,500 or 2,000 beds. I mean, you can order other foods, but you have the option to order plant-based meals. And that will come with a handout that'll give them information about it. And of course, the documentary film, incredible documentary film, Forks Over Knives, plays on continuous loop on the TVs, on the inpatient TVs. So those TVs that are right by the patient's bed, well, it plays on continuous loop. So I mean, you can watch another channel, but it plays on continuous loop on one of those channels. So now I can walk in a patient's room. What happened before is I'd walk into a patient's room before we had all this. I'd mention plants, I'd leave, dinner would come, it would be chicken. I'm like totally undercut. It was impossible to get traction. And now I can go in a patient's room, tell them about plants. We order the food that comes with a handout, and I put on Forks Over Knives, and it's great. So like the whole plant posse is with me. And look, I don't expect us to be able to, take someone from a typical Western diet to whole food plant-based, maybe no oil after 2 days in a hospital. But we're planting a seed. And so it gives us a chance. If we didn't do it, we didn't give them the information, there'd be no chance. So this gives us a fighting chance to help make meaningful lifestyle change. So and that's been a really useful thing for us. And there have been a bunch of other initiatives in our program. And we have a clinical arm, an educational arm, and a smaller research arm. And I guess sort of the highlight of the educational arm is we've developed a preventive cardiology conference here that is primarily plant-based, but not exclusively, because my goal with it is I love speaking to people who are already plant-based and discussing the evidence and experience. But my real goal with this program is to introduce this information to people who would never otherwise hear it, because I think we're going to have much more bang for the buck, if you will, with that. And so I want to get docs to our conference, nurses, RDs, physician assistants to our conference who don't know about this. So I usually have our keynote speaker be someone who is really well known in medical circles, but like not a plant person. So that'll bring in a bunch of other people, and then they'll be there to hear, Dr. McMacken, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Barnard, Dr. Williams speak all about plant-based nutrition stuff in an incredibly evidence-based way. So it's a real win-win. So I'm hoping that we could change a lot of behavior with that. And of course, those people can leave and have lots of ripple effects. So, and of course, we have that small research arm as well, and we're working on ramping that up. But so I think on the whole, we've been incredibly embraced by our system, and we've been able to grow in a lot of concrete and I think meaningful ways. And don't get me wrong, like not everybody does it, not everybody supports it, not everybody agrees with it, but it's changed the conversation, and we've built an infrastructure. So it's been a great ride.
Excellent. That sounds great. Fantastic. I mean, one of my goals in starting this podcast was I was hoping there would be two audiences. One is average layperson who wants to learn more about plant-based nutrition and maybe implement diet and lifestyle changes into their life. The second audience was I thought that these conversations may appeal to current students who are going through school, who are learning about medicine, or current doctors, PAs, nurses, that kind of thing, who want to learn from the best. So we're kind of on the same page there. And the other thing I wanted to say was it really, I might be putting words in your mouth, but if I were you, I'd be thinking, now we are truly doing as much as we possibly can for patients who come in, let's say, with a heart attack, where we not only save their life with really good immediate acute care, but we're offering them and possibly giving them great food, great information, a DVD. So it's kind of full circle with that. And I've heard that many times where doctors say, I give them information and then they get served crap from the hospital cafeteria. So I could see that as being very frustrating. Tell me about, let's segue into about how you got into medicine in the first place and sort of your brothers, your family. Talk to us about that.
Well, so when I was a kid, I had two brothers who died from an incurable disease, and my brother Daniel and my brother Michael. My brother Daniel lived about 3.5 years. My brother Michael lived about one day. And I don't remember my brother Michael, but I'm the oldest, so I was about 7 when Daniel died, and that sort of got me moving in a direction toward wanting to help people. I certainly couldn't like articulate it in a way that'd be like, oh, I want to be a doctor and a cardiologist. I just kind of knew I wanted to help people. That had always been my slant. And I started medical school. I started undergrad, and I was pre-med, and I liked the classes that I was taking, and I never really left that path. I was interested in a bunch of other topics, but medicine really felt like I was more called to it, if you will. And so I got lucky, and things worked out, and I got into medical school and residency and fellowship, and was able to complete my training. So, and I feel like in some ways, I'm in the family business, if you will. My mom is a psychologist and an academic psychologist. She's a professor of pediatrics at Rutgers Medical School and the director of the Sudden Infant Death Syndrome Center of New Jersey. And they've done incredible work to lower SIDS rates in New Jersey. And they even recently created an app related to SIDS, which has been getting a lot of attention and appropriately so, to help scale knowledge about SIDS prevention. So she's been an incredible inspiration for me. And my stepfather he's a physician as well. And it's been great I can talk with him about all kinds of medical related topics, research related topics. He's a professor of pediatrics as well. So that's that. And my brother Scott, he's not in the medical world, but he's now plant-based, and his wife is plant-based, and hopefully we can get their kids a little more plant-based. But that's been great. And actually, as part of our conference, my family, my mom, my dad, my brother and I, we started a memorial lecture in honor of my brother. So it's the Daniel and Michael Ostfeld Memorial Lecture in Preventive Cardiology. And so Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn gave the very first lecture last year, and he's just been an incredible friend and mentor to me, to our program. And Dr. Colin Campbell will be giving the second one on October 6th for our conference here at Montefiore.
Very good. Very cool. I want to get pretty deep into one of your specialties, heart disease and the heart as a cardiologist. So as being, our nation's, I think there's a flip flop between 1 and 2 as being the 1 and 2 form of this cause of mortality, but it's up there. Can you give us a broad 500-foot view of, do we know the causes of heart disease? Because it seems like there's a lot of hype around ketosis and ketogenic diets now, which are pretty much the antithesis to plant-based. Then there's paleo, and I guess I'm one to look at experts and see what they say who are touting these, and they all seem to have their reasons why people should be eating this way. So do we really know what causes heart disease, Dr. Ostfeld?
That's a great question. And I'm always humbled by how sometimes seemingly little we know. Now we're just scratching the surface, for example, of the microbiome. And there are probably about 1 trillion gut bacteria living in each one of us. And you could say that we're the parasites, really, not them. And that, so we're just, and the infinite potential combinations of how that impacts our health is off the charts. So it's very important, I think, to always stay open to other explanations and things like that. And so I was actually interesting. I was just having this conversation like on text with Dr. McMacken last night. We were talking about an article, and this is not a new theme, but we were talking about how, we know a lot in medicine, we know a lot. And I think we have a very good sense of what what causes heart disease. And I'll circle back to that. Or when I say heart disease, I mean cholesterol blockages in the blood vessels that feed the heart with blood. Heart disease is obviously a pretty broad term. But once, now that we're just scratching the surface with the microbiome and way enzymes interact, you could say maybe we really only know maybe 20% or 15% of what goes into health. And there's a lot of other stuff we need to study. And that's great. But so given that, I think it's really useful for us to take, like you're saying, a 500-foot view of populations that live the longest and have the lowest rates of heart disease. Like, what are they doing? Because even if we don't know all the mechanisms that go into why what they're doing makes them live so long, they're living that long, and they can serve kind of as a North Star for us to catch up with our investigative knowledge. And even if we know, say, 10%, what they've been doing is kind of like 100% of the knowledge, because they're the groups now who are living the longest. So I look at them as an inspiration, or informationally inspirational, about helping to guide us with how to live. And if you look at the longest living populations in the world, they are uniformly, largely plant-based. Not exclusively, but largely plant-based. Of course, and that's very well documented in the blue zones. And to my knowledge, there is no long living population that ate an animal-based ketogenic diet at all. So if you take that 500-foot view and you're humble about the breadth and depth of our knowledge about heart disease, then to me, that argues from a 500-foot view that a plant-based diet is really the optimal one for cardiovascular health and health in general. And of course, when you take people who lived in the blue zone-like populations, or areas, and then you move them to the Western world or the Western world to them, they get worse. And they very quickly catch up to us with disease. Now, in terms of what causes heart disease and cholesterol blockages in the heart, typically what happens is the endothelial cells, those are the cells that line the inner wall of our arteries. They're like the wallpaper, if you will. They can get injured. And that can happen in a variety of ways, whether that's through inflammation or smoking or pollution or toxic Western diet. And I would argue a lot of animal products lead to inflammation in a variety of ways we could talk about. And then when those endothelial cells get injured, the cholesterol particles in our blood then can burrow across them where they can and land like right under the wallpaper in the wall of the artery. And when they're there, they get oxidized. And what that means is they get irritating like a splinter. So you've had a splinter in your finger and it gets like red and painful. Well, it's the same kind of thing, except in the wall of your artery where you kind of especially don't want it. And then what happens is those endothelial cells get more injured because there's more inflammation and more oxidative stress and more cholesterol particles burrow across. And then the process just continues. More and more cells get in there, plaques grow, the artery gets less and less healthy. And then there's this little cap that overlies that growing plaque that's between the growing plaque and where the blood flows. And you never want that plaque to touch the blood because that could make the blood completely clot off, like shut the door on blood flow. And that is an emergency. That's a heart attack. Like if you've ever seen those medical drama shows, that there's, oh my God, there's a big heart attack. We have to go to the cath lab. That's what's happening. The plaque has touched the blood. The door is shut. And what so happens is that cap, with all the inflammation, all the oxidative stress, gets thinner and thinner and weaker. And then some random Tuesday afternoon, it cracks, the plaque touches the blood, the door may shut, no more blood flow. But it's not like you're fine, and boom, one day there's a heart attack. As you're injuring your body, you are slowly making yourself sicker and weaker every day. It's just in, of course, much more subtle ways than a dramatic heart attack does. And like you were saying before, there's a race that no one wants to win, the number one killer. And, cardiovascular disease and cancer, they're at it, they're neck and neck. But it's turning out more and more that the lifestyle that leads to cardiovascular disease also leads to cancer. And I kind of look at it like, which is your body just slightly more resistant to? Is it cardiovascular disease or is it cancer? And whichever one it's just slightly more resistant to, the other one's going to win. If you choose to have a more unhealthy diet lifestyle. And obviously it's not just, there are, I don't want to put the onus just on the person. There are obviously some, there are genetic contributions and other things as well that contribute. It is a multifactorial issue, but at least to the degree to which things are in our control, we can profoundly modify our risk. And it reminds me of this really cool research study that this guy, Dr. Sekar Katharesan, was the lead author on, and brilliant cardiologist, really, really nice guy. And what he did, this is published in New England Journal of Medicine, I think a year ago about. And what he did was he had about a cohort of 2,500 or so people, and they created a genetic risk score where they found 26 genetic markers that the more and more you had, the worse you did from a cardiovascular standpoint. And that's not surprising because genes matter. But that's what they found. The more markers you have, the worse you did. But the cool thing about that study is that they then split people into levels of healthy lifestyle. So least healthy, middle healthy, most healthy. And if you are in the highest genetic risk category, so your genes are not your friend in terms of cardiovascular disease, if you adopted the healthiest lifestyle, you lowered your future risk of a cardiovascular event by about 50% compared to the least healthy lifestyle. So genes matter, but lifestyle matters a lot too. That study is meaningful for me for a few reasons, because a lot of times patients will be like, oh, disease X, Y, or Z runs in my family. And so we can pull that out and be like, well, genes run in families, but so does lifestyle. And then the thing about the healthiest lifestyle group in that study was the threshold to get into it was pretty low. Like if you exercised at least once a week, that's the healthy lifestyle group. If you ate better than 50% of the people in the study, that's the healthy lifestyle group. So imagine if you exercised 4 times a week and ate better than 90% of the people, you would, presumably lower your risk much more.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe in the all magic number that's, certainly you've heard of, is the blood cholesterol number of being under 150, basically making you heart attack proof? Do you subscribe to that?
Not completely, but a lot. I think it matters, and a lot. You never want to say, I certainly don't ever tell my patients they're heart attack proof, because even in Dr. Esselstyn's amazing study with 200 or so people who adopted a plant-based diet, and about 90% of them were with known heart disease, and 90% of them adhered to the healthier lifestyle, even one of them had an event. So I don't ever say heart attack proof, but when you get your cholesterol levels so low on a plant-based diet, you're protecting yourself in all kinds of ways. One of those great ways is with the cholesterol level. So I do think when you get your cholesterol levels really low, it's helpful. And you can extrapolate to, there's some other interesting studies. These are not plant-based studies, but they're studies of a new cholesterol lowering med called PCSK9 inhibitors, where they would inject people with it, and it like really, really lowers cholesterol. Like LDL can get in the 20s or 30s. And it seemed like the benefits just kept on going. Like the lower, it's like limbo. How low can you go? It seemed like it got better. So, but these patients were not also on a plant-based diet. So I don't really know how to extrapolate an LDL of 30 on PCSK9 inhibitor to a plant-based person whose LDL is 20. But the one comparison that you can make is that in Esselstyn's study, they got to an LDL level in the 70s with a combination of statins and lifestyle. And in a separate cardiology study with similar patients, so I'm comparing 2 different studies called the COURAGE trial, with also stable coronary disease, just like Dr. Esselstyn's, with a combination of statins and, quote, healthier lifestyle, they got their LDLs into the 70s as well, even a teeny bit lower than in Esselstyn's. But the event rate in those studies, in the COURAGE study, they had about a 19% cardiovascular event rate, meaning heart attack, stroke, major cardiac event. In Esselstyn's, they concluded that they had a 0.6% event rate. So 19% versus 0.6 with a pretty similar LDL cholesterol level. And how do you account for this difference? And I can't unequivocally tell you, but my hypothesis is that when you get to an LDL level in the 70s, or when you're eating a plant-based diet and getting to an LDL in the 70s, I mean, yeah, that's good for your cholesterol, but it's good for you for dozens and dozens of other reasons that accounts for this profound difference. So I do think lower is better, but I wouldn't tell someone that they're heart attack proof.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to have you address maybe some cardiovascular disease myths. I just happened to be scrolling online and saw these, and I thought they were interesting. Just a few of them. Number one is, I'm too young to worry about cardiovascular disease. What would you say to a patient who says that?
I would say, if only that were ever true. 2/3 of 12-year-olds in the US have early signs of cardiovascular disease, meaning cholesterol disease in the blood vessels in their heart. And we know this from autopsy studies of kids who died for other reasons. And there are a variety of other epidemiologic studies that, sort of support similar kinds of, and autopsy studies that support similar kinds of themes of impressively high rates of cardiovascular disease when in young people. So no, it's never too early to start thinking about it, and it's never too late.
hmm This next one, actually, you already covered. I was going to say cardiovascular disease runs in my family. There's nothing I can do, and I believe you just covered that. But what if I flipped it around and said cardiovascular? I'm someone who says cardiovascular disease doesn't run in my family. There's nothing to worry about. I can still get it, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It's just so obscenely common. When it's at least right now, I think it's a little bit ahead, like a neck ahead of cancer. Great, we got the title, right? But um, no, when it's so common, it's going to be touching people who have genetic risk, who don't have genetic risk, and everyone in between. And I mean, it's so profoundly an environmentally mediated disease, not exclusively. And it just goes back to those migration studies we talked about. You take someone from a healthy environment, you move them to an unhealthy environment, and within a generation or two, they've totally caught up. That's not genes. Evolution takes millions and millions of years. That's lifestyle.
Yeah. I saw this question. I'm not a. I tell people jokingly with a smile on my face, I'm not a troll, but I'm in a few like ketogenic groups. I'm in a few paleo groups on Facebook, but also a lot of vegan, vegetarian, and plant-based groups, just to kind of get a pulse on what are people interested in, what questions are people asking, and this question was actually very applicable to what we're talking about. This person said she's been whole foods plant based, no oil for 2 years. And she basically went to her doctor. It looked like she was in her mid 50s, upper 50s. She went to her doctor, and after 2 years being whole foods plant based, they decided to put a stent in, a stent or two in, and she was asking, well, what gives? Like, shouldn't this be regressing because of what we hear from Dr. Esselstyn and others? So my question is, can atherosclerosis within our vessels progress to the point where it can't regress?
Well, in terms of that question, it doesn't regress in everybody if they go whole food, plant based, no oil. And I don't want to give people the impression that they'll be bulletproof, but I do believe that they will profoundly improve their health. I've never seen anything come close to the breadth and depth of benefits that a plant-based diet provides. Now, that being said, in terms of, if a cardiac lesion, a cholesterol blockage, if it's really, really calcified, and that happens over time, those are probably not going to shrink. The artery, as well as many, many other things, are going to get better. But that plaque probably won't shrink. Now, the health of we have about 60,000 miles of blood vessels in our body. So that one blockage in one spot, you don't want that. But if you have it somewhere, you have it everywhere. It's a systemic disease. You may not have a 95% blockage everywhere, but you're going to have some degree of atherosclerosis. And the whole theme of, like, with erectile dysfunction, we call that the canary in the coal mine for cardiovascular disease, because the artery to the penis, by the time that has a blockage that's causing poor blood flow to the penis, that artery is smaller than the artery to the heart. So by the time you're having erectile dysfunction, it's extremely likely you have cholesterol disease in blood vessels in your heart. It just hasn't clinically manifest. So, even though, let's say, one blockage didn't shrink, you're still profoundly improving the health of other plaques, making them less likely to rupture. So I wouldn't really be discouraged by that. I'd be encouraged that you haven't had progression or things got worse, because that's the usual course. If you eat a quote healthy Western diet, the usual course is another heart attack, another stent, a bypass surgery. So that's the usual. You've left the usual path. So congratulations, that's great. Now the devil, of course, is in the details. Um, let's just take her at her word that she's fully whole food, plant based, no oil, which is, sometimes people say that, and that's not actually the case. But let's do that. And sometimes people get stents when it's of questionable indication. And so maybe she had a glaring need for it, or maybe she didn't. And that would take a deep dive into her records. And sometimes people put in stents because they're more concerned about the size of the blockage than, say, the physiology of it. But that is, I certainly couldn't say that for sure at all. It may have been completely 100% indicated. But I'm glad that person, from my 500-foot view, went plant-based, because I think that's going to delay the progression of other disease and help this person in other ways.
Right. I mean, I guess what I would have said to this woman is, look, you're not going to get worse. Eating this way is not going to progress the your atherosclerotic plaques, right? I mean, even if, like you said, if it's calcified, it's not guaranteed that it'll get rid of it, but it's not going to progress. I want to do this is sort of a quick section here, a quick but fun section. This article comes from a website of, actually, they're a cardiologist, and these are the top 10 foods to keep your arteries clean. All right. Okay. So we could just kind of go through these and tell me what your professional opinion would be if a patient asked you about these. So let's go with number 1, Dr. Ostfeld. What about grass-fed beef?
Well, I certainly would not encourage any of my patients to eat grass-fed beef. Grass-fed beef is probably trivially better than, like, I guess, more conventionally farmed beef, but you're still getting the cholesterol. You're still getting the trimethylamine oxide. You're still getting the Nu5-GC, which is a compound in non-human mammals that can promote inflammation in us, because we create an immune reaction to it because it's foreign to us. And you're also using those calories that you could have been using for something much healthier, like vegetables and fruits. So I would remove that from my top 10 list.
Number 2, how about kale?
Yeah, have at it. I mean, definitely like-minded with this person in that regard. And yeah, I encourage my patients to have at least 3 servings of dark green leafy vegetables each day. I consider a serving about a cup. So that's great.
Number 3, beets.
Yes, that's wonderful. And I know that you are a former extremely high-level cyclist. And as you know, far better than I, there's a good bit of data that beetroot juice and beets can help improve athletic performance by improving the efficiency of our mitochondria. Those are our power plants, of course. And the mitochondria make ATP. That's our fuel. Cars get gas. We use ATP. That's our gas. Well, mitochondria make ATP more efficiently when they're bathing in beets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, bingo. I'm 100% with you. How about, ever heard of chlorella?
Yeah, I don't know a lot about it. I know it's a supplement, but I really wouldn't be able to meaningfully weigh in on it.
Okay. How about next on the list is wild salmon?
Well, so I would take that off the list, but not as quickly as I would the grass-fed beef. Now, it's, when we talk about wild salmon or this or that, we're thinking about these like really environmentally pure, which to my knowledge is just not true, because we kind of treat the ocean like a garbage dump. There's tons of toxins, which really doesn't get the attention it deserves. When you're eating a fish, you're often eating like teeny weeny portions of those plastic bags you get at the grocery store, because we dump them in the ocean and they like dissolve into little pieces and the fish eat them, and then you're eating it.
Right.
It's like the plastic bag's ultimate revenge. And so they have mercury and PCBs and other toxins. Also, if you remember the tsunami in Japan, maybe I forget how long ago now, but the nuclear reactor, when it's a meltdown, they did these like geothermal maps of the radiation, and it spread all the way to San Diego. That's like the whole Pacific Ocean,
right?
And the fish swim around.
Right.
So there's that kind of stuff. And then, of course, the fish have trimethylamine oxide in them. And at least in a study from Dr. Song, a large epidemiologic study, where if you replace just 3% of your calories from animal-based foods with 3% of calories from plant-based foods, he replaced 3% of calories from fish with 3% of calories from plant-based foods. And I believe that was associated with a 6% lower hazard of death. And this is about 140,000 people with 3.5 million person years of follow-up. So just 3% of calories from fish. And then, of course, the they don't make omega 3s. They get them because they eat plants. So you can just get rid of the middleman. But the evidence against fish is nowhere near as strong as it is against, you know, red meat. So,
Yeah.
but I would not have a wild caught salmon on my list.
Got it. And so the big thing though is people say, yeah, it's really high in omega 3s, but like you said, you can get those from plant sources. I mean, mine happen to be flax, chia, walnuts. Do you have any more off the top of your head, good omega 3 sources?
I often encourage my patients to have hemp seeds as well. And of course, I'm sure like you're doing with the flax seeds, you have to, be sure they're flaxseed meal, like all ground up. Otherwise, you're not going to absorb it. But that's exactly, I mean, I literally tell my patients to have 2 heaping tablespoons of hemp seeds, chia seeds, or ground flaxseed meal.
Mm. How about avocados? Are you a fan of avocados and more of a fattier plant food?
I am a fan of avocados. There is a small randomized trial where they were associated with lowering cholesterol level. I feel that where I work, there's a very large Hispanic population, and I think the avocado is a big part of how they eat. And that helps me get people to further embrace the diet. I think um, it's extremely tasty. It's got a nice texture. People really like it. So I'm okay. I'm very okay with it. Now, if people have advanced heart disease, I know Dr. Esselstyn encouraged patients to not have avocado because of the higher fat content in it. And so if I have people with really advanced disease, I'll encourage them to not have it because of the outcomes of Dr. Esselstyn's work. But otherwise, if someone doesn't have known heart disease, I'm very comfortable with it. And with a little bit, I'm okay with, having like a quarter of an avocado a day, because I really think, at least in my experience, it helps with compliance.
Almonds.
I prefer raw walnuts because of the better omega-3, omega-6 ratio. But there are a lot of large epidemiologic studies that support, like hundreds of thousands of people, that support nut consumption being associated with lower mortality as well as other beneficial endpoints. So, and they're nutrient packed. So I prefer walnuts, but I'm okay with raw nuts, but a small amount,
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't evolve to eat a jar of nuts. They were hard to get. They were in a shell, and you had to climb a tree, and so that seems the antithesis of how they should be used
Right.
to me. So a small handful. I prefer walnuts, but other raw nuts I'm okay with as well.
And you can go to Costco and buy like a 5-gallon bucket of cashews. How about broccoli? I can probably guess about that. Yay for
Yeah,
broccoli.
I'm sure your viewer or your listeners are on the fence about what I'm going to say for broccoli. But yeah, please have at it.
The last two are actually a little bit more controversial, probably for you. Last two: eggs and olive
Uh-huh.
oil.
So eggs, for me, there's no controversy. I encourage my patients to not have eggs. Um, and the reasons are multiple, but you know, at least the egg yolk itself has a ton of cholesterol in it. It has and it has carnitine in it, so it can lead to the formation of trimethylamine oxide. And there are a variety of epidemiologic studies that show. There's actually one just out of Korea. Maybe it was published a month ago with about 9,000 people or so. I think. I'm not gonna have the details of this exactly right. And those with diabetes who ate more eggs in that study did worse. That's just one of many studies like that. And a number of these studies when you're randomized to few eggs or more eggs, and they have similar kinds of outcomes. If you start scratching the surface, they're often sponsored by the egg industry, and they're often replacing the the arm that has fewer eggs. They're replacing those calories with unhealthy things like more meat and other non-healthy things, in my opinion. And so it's not all that surprising that at the end of the day, they kind of look similar. Because for example, if you had someone eat junk and then you took away some of that junk, but you replaced it with other junk, like why would we think it would look better? If you could, this is just an opinion, But you could take a real cynical look at those kinds of studies and say, what's your real motivation here? Is your real motivation to support your bottom line, or is it human health? And at the end of the day, people have to sleep at night, and everyone gets there in their own way. To me, eggs are not controversial. I encourage my patients to not have it. And in that song study with a 3% replacement, if you replace 3% of your calories, just 3% of your calories from eggs with 3% of calories from plant-based protein, as I recall, that was associated with a 19% lower hazard of death. So I prefer no eggs. The other one was, tell me the second one again.
Olive oil.
Olive oil. Yeah, I go less to the mat on this one because I don't think the evidence is as strong, but I do encourage my patients to not have oil. But I wouldn't fully go to the mat on it. Now, of course, Esselstyn's amazing work, he had people not have oil, and he had amazing, amazing outcomes. I've never seen better outcomes. So we have to keep that in mind. And you take a perfectly good olive, right? And you suck out the fat, leaving behind all the fiber, all the phytonutrients, stuff that is good for you. I'm like, have an olive, have at it. But so you're left with a pile of fat with almost no nutrients. And it's got 120 calories per tablespoon, the most calorically dense food that we have. And obesity is, of course, an issue. And you see what happens. Like, people will go to the salad bar, they'll put the salad, and then they'll pour on olive oil. They'll talk to the friend, they're pouring on olive oil. That's like hundreds and hundreds of calories. Like, you could pile on ice cream and whipped cream and all this stuff, and it would probably be fewer calories if you're just thinking from that lens. So, I mean, that's a real issue. And then, of course, there are studies that show that olive oil does acutely worsen blood vessel function. Like Robert Vogel, a cardiologist, did some great work where he took people and he fed them a salad. And not surprisingly, blood vessel function improved. But then he put olive oil on the salad, and it did not improve as much. It was like the olive oil was mitigating the benefit of the salad. So with that, and with Dr. Esselstyn's clinical experience, and with my anecdotal experience of the patients that I see who really have just like the most obscene turnarounds like you've never seen before are the ones who also not have oil. That's why I encourage people to not have oil, but I don't go to the mat.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you're speaking all over the place, Dr. Ostfeld, including this coming Monday. You're going to be in my neck of the woods, and hopefully we can get together and get a picture. You're going to be speaking at Rochester Lifestyle Medicine with Dr. Ted Barnett. But you're speaking all over, and you're all over social media too. What are you most excited about in the future when it comes to plant-based nutrition and advocacy and that whole realm?
Yeah, that's a great question. What am I most excited about? Well, I'm super excited. I'm trying to think about what I'm most excited about while I'm sort of hawing my way through this answer. I'm super excited about the incredible energy and momentum that this information is getting. By this information, I mean plant-based nutrition is getting across all kinds of different venues, from celebrities to physicians, to research studies, to the kind of incredible work that you're doing. All of it matters a lot, because everyone has a little ripple effect, and it seems like it really takes grassroots change to make change at the top. So I think on an Uber level, if you will, I'm really most excited about the incredible momentum. Like, when I started my program, like 6-7 years ago, I didn't know anyone else in New York City with like 9 million people doing this. I'm like, how is it that like the closest program is in Cleveland with Dr. Esselstyn? It's ridiculous, and really an embarrassment to our profession as physicians, I think. But there's an incredible woman I'm friends with who works at Eric Adams, the Brooklyn Borough President's office. Her name is Rachel Atchinson. And she recently moved to New York City, and she created kind of a group of healthcare people who are interested in plant-based nutrition. And I went to the first meeting a few months ago, and there were like 20, 30 people in the room doing really meaningful things. People you would know, like Dr. Michelle McMacken and others. So it was really, it's just great to see that change. So I think it's the momentum moving us forward, and we need bites in all kinds of directions. We need more research projects to bring along more skeptical physicians and scientists and others. And, we need, it's amazing how Beyonce tweeted out she was vegan. And I do think we need to stop the circular firing squad, if you will. Like, you could be a junk food vegan, of course, and that's not healthy. And there's certainly studies to support that. But, like, I could scream from the hilltops to the end of time, but Beyonce sends out one tweet about, plant-based or vegan or something. That's more attention than I will ever get it ever in my life times 50.
Right.
But then, of course, the plant-based community, or maybe some of the vegan community, was like, well, you're not vegan enough. You only did it for a month, and they're shooting her down. Like, no, no, no. That's the exact, I think, wrong way to look at it. She's putting this information in front of millions of people. That's amazing. Like, I could never do that. So, so I think it's the momentum and how we're all contributing in important ways.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think we need to be more supportive. I think, there's always going to be, in any kind of group, there's always going to be a few bad apples who kind of ruin it for the rest of us. But I think this kind of encouragement and saying, hey, if you were vegan for a month, that's great. Or if you're plant-based for a month, that's great. How'd you feel? Why'd you stop? And just you do you and let them do them, but just always be supportive. What I say to my followers is remain responsible ambassadors to this movement because of that exact thing you were just mentioning. Well, good. Did you have, Dr. Ostfeld, did you have sort of a final ask, recommendation, or plug, or do you got a book or something like that? Let's wrap this up.
Oh, well, thank you. So I do not have a book or a product or anything like that, but I do have a couple of, I guess, plugs or asks. So the first one is that we have our Montefiore Einstein Preventive Cardiology Conference coming up on October 6th of this year, 2018, Saturday, October 6th. And I would love it if people would come. We sold out last year about a month in advance. It blew us away. And it's really an incredible lineup. It's Dr. Kim Williams, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Dr. Colin Campbell, Dr. Michelle McMacken, Dr. Joel Kahn. I'm probably forgetting a couple. There's Dr. Valentin Fuster, who's huge in cardiology circles, not really a plant person, but huge in cardiology circles and prevention. And would love for you to come. It's open for everyone. There's continuing education credits for nurses, for RDs, and for physicians. And the way to register is www.mecme.org. M as in Mary, E as in elephant, C as in Charlie, M as in Mary, E as in elephant.org, mecme.org. And it's a little complicated, the website, so you have to persevere a little bit. My apologies. But it won't be hard to find that if you look for that date in our talk, and you have to click on the right thing, but you'll get there. So that's plug number one. Would love for you guys to come. And I guess plug number two is we really need everyone on board. And I know that you and a lot of your listeners are incredibly active and helping to move this information forward. But if there's something else you can do, if you can set up a forks over knives screening at your local high school or religious center, you can have a potluck dinner or something to help get this information out there more and more. I just so impressed with the way it can profoundly impact health. And, of course, I should say before someone makes a change, there are some instances we have to be very, very careful. So if you're going to make a profound dietary change, it is important, of course, to talk about it with your doc, because almost always it's incredibly helpful. But there are a couple of times we have to be careful about the transition. So yeah, those would be my two plugs.
Very good. And actually, if you're okay on time, I have just one last question that I thought was really good that
Sure.
was put forward by one of my patrons of my podcast. And I can think it's very applicable to everyone. This person says, as whole foods plant-based foodies, we know about the mountain of compelling lifestyle evidence that goes along with this lifestyle. It seems that whenever people begin to ask us thoughtful, well-intentioned questions, the conversation can tangent and spiral away from the point. This is especially challenging for people who may be best served by adopting a whole foods plant-based lifestyle, but who may know so little this conversation that they are in, either quickly they're lost by the details or just lose interest, regardless of how positively the information could change their lives. As a cardiologist, in a few lines, how do you best convey a concise, memorable, whole foods plant-based message that will stick with your patients or anyone listening and hopefully influence change?
It's a great point, and an incredibly common theme and hurdle. For whatever you will, I mean, I have the benefit of, someone's there in the office because they're worried about their health and they're looking to their doctor for information to improve that. So I kind of come at it on second base already. One of the things I tell my patients is that I've been a cardiologist now for about 15 years. And outside of a medical emergency, like someone gets shot and has to be put back together again, I've never seen anything come close to the breadth and depth of benefits that a plant-based diet provides. And I think in the situations that that person is mentioning, people get religiously attached to, it seems like, how they're eating and can get quite offended. And, so you obviously want to tread lightly, but you can say that, there are a bunch of physicians out there who think this is an incredibly healthful way to live. And if you're interested, a really wonderful way to start is, of course, to watch the documentary film Forks Over Knives.
Mhm.
And, I would keep it sort of high level like that. And then hopefully you'll pique their curiosity to watch the film.
Mhm.
That I ask all my patients to watch it. A lot of our patients don't have the ability to, when we work to help them with that. But I will ask all my patients to watch it because it's such a compelling documentary.
Cool. Very good. Well, I'm so glad we were able to get this conversation in, Dr. Ostfeld. We've been working for several months, and thank you to your assistant, Laura, I believe, who helped us put this together. This will make for a great final production. Thank you so much for your time again, Dr. Robert Ostfeld.
Thank you so much. It's been a real honor to be here with you and your audience. So thank you.
I'm excited to announce and welcome two new patrons of the podcast, Michelle O'Keefe and Natasha Spearman Issip. Natasha is also the newest member of the Board of Trustees. What does this mean? Well, members who donate at certain levels get certain rewards, and you can read about them by going to patreon.com/Ian Kramer podcast. But understand that every donation, whether it's $1 or $100, is valued and appreciated. I never lose sight of the fact that this is your hard-earned money, and you're putting your trust in me to use it to spread this message and continue to produce a quality product. So thank you to all of the patrons out there. And for those of you who are new to this podcast, I want to tell you about what Patreon is and what being a patron means. So in a nutshell, if you enjoy these podcasts with experts and if they add value to your life, you can become a patron of my work through a service called Patreon. Every time a new episode comes out, you get charged whatever you choose as your donation level. It's up to you what level you want to donate at, and there's also other features and limits that you can set. And like I said, these donations help me buy new equipment and spread the podcast to a larger audience. And if you have any questions on how this works, email me at ianmkramer@gmail.com. Until next time, keep eating more plants, remain responsible ambassadors to this movement, and stay healthy.
and then